Welcome everyone to our first satellite session of the 5th Africa Regulatory Conference. We are very happy to see so many participants joining us today. In continuity of the very comprehensive discussions on key regulatory topics that we heard during last week's conference, we will today do a deep dive on key pharmacovigilance related topics that are relevant for the Africa continent. And before I hand over to my colleague Wim van der Spur, chair of the FPA International Pharmacovigilance Group, and who led the development of this very interesting session, I would like to share with you these few housekeeping details. The Africa Regulatory Conference will be held in English with simultaneous interpretation services in French and Portuguese. For this, at the bottom of your screen, you have a little globe where you can switch languages between English, Portuguese, and French. All participants are being muted to ensure a good sound quality. So we encourage you to use a Q&A toolbox that is also located at the bottom of your screen to raise any question that you may have for speakers and panelists during the session. Please note that there is also an option to like or vote for a question that was already raised. And so you can use this, and we encourage you to use this during the webinar. We really value your input and invite you to use the Mentimeter tool to engage with us during the session. We will have like a question at the beginning to ask you, and we'd like to see actually where you are from. And as a final point, the full Africa Regulatory Conference is being recorded. All the presentations and the videos will be made available on the website, and following the conference, you will also be able to access now and you could continue to access during and after the conference the bios and photos of all our speakers and panelists participating to the conference. I wish you all a very fruitful discussion. And without further delay, I would like to pass over to my colleague Wim to launch the pharmacovigilance satellite session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And maybe we can move to the next slide. So before we go into our first Menti question, I also want to welcome all of you on behalf of myself, but also on behalf of the speakers and the moderators. Thank you for joining this interesting PV session that is, as Sarah already pointed out, part of the IFPMA Regulatory Conference. I also welcome all of our speakers as well as the moderators, and I want to thank IFPMA and the FPA International PV Group for this excellent collaboration today. I think it will be a really good opportunity today to connect and learn, and to connect all of the various people on the call today. And in order to understand what your background is, we would like you now to connect to Menti, and you have the instructions here on the screen. You can connect by going to www.menti.com and enter the code, or you can use the QR code. And there is a question there about what your background is, just so that we have a better understanding of the audience for today. And we have the first responses coming in. I will give it a couple of seconds more. But as you can see, we have a high representation from industry, but also from the regulators, and a smaller representation from academia. So thank you everyone for participating in this Menti. And in order to make sure that we will stay in our planned time, I will move on. So maybe we can go to the next slide. So my name is Willemijn van der Spur. I work for Bristol Myers Squibb in the Pharmacovigilance Drug Safety Department. And I'm also chairing the FPR International PV Group. As you all know, yesterday we celebrated the World Patient Safety Day with a focus on engaging patients for patient safety. And the WHO slogan for that safety day is Elevate the Voice of Patients. So throughout the conference today, where you will see the different topics that we are going to address, we also bear in mind that we all hold responsibility to work towards the goal that WHO is promoting, and that is to work as partners and start including patients to improve safety and involve patients also in further development and policy making. You will find that the different sessions that we have scheduled for today as part of the IFPMA regulatory conference aims to do just that, to ensure that we work towards the safe use of medicines for patients across the world, with a focus on Africa specifically today. Our agenda, which you would have seen online, covers 3 sessions. So for those different sessions, we have a number of very experienced speakers and moderators. The moderators will be introducing the speakers for the session. And our moderators for today are Benita Morar from AbbVie, Jayesh Pandit from Bayer, Patricia Harding from Eli Lilly, and Sean Burke from MSD. The first session will focus specifically on collaboration and learnings in PV and collaboration between countries. The second session will focus on inspections and QPPV activities and training. And our final session is a more informal panel discussion that will allow you to discuss specifically areas on divergence and harmonization. So with that, I would like to move into our first session, which focuses on collaboration and learning in PV and between countries. PV regulations have developed very fast over the last few years in African countries. And despite variability, we will see some strong collaborative efforts and examples that we can learn from as we listen to our expert speakers. Reliance and collaboration will come to the forefront through COVID activities that will be presented. And this can be a learning as we move into the future for further PV collaboration. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to our speakers for the first session. Our first speaker is Raj Long. She is the Deputy Director for Integrated Development Global Health at the Gates Foundation. And Raj has over 35 years of regulatory and clinical development experience, as well as accelerating access. She has worked in industry and has served as an advisor to the Department of Health and Social Care at the European Union, at the Gates Foundation, and at the WHO. And she currently supports the WHO COVID vaccine manufacturing task force. I will also introduce our second speaker for this session, and that is Mafora Matlala. Mafora is the PV manager at the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, and she has over 11 years experience in medicines regulation, of which 8 years in pharmacovigilance. She is a pharmacist as well as an epidemiologist, and she currently supports the National Immunization Safety Expert Committee, and she is an active member of the African Union Smart Safety Surveillance Joint Management Group, as well as the Continental Safety Working Group. And these groups facilitate cross-country signal management for COVID vaccines in Africa. So we will start with Raj, we will then hand over to Flora, and at the end of the 2 speakers, we will have time for a Q&A. Raj, over to you.
Thank you. Wim, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Wim, for the introduction and the segue into the first session. Good morning, everyone online. Delighted to be here, and I'm going to take the opportunity to share some work that's been going on at the African level, but really not with any specific countries, but really having a vision for a continental serving a pharmacovigilance functional system, end-to-end functional system that can actually, that would then serve the African continent. A system that will be that is being designed as we speak by the Africans, and data that will be used by the Africans as well. So essentially, it's a system by Africans for Africans, and that's the theme of what we're really going to share. That doesn't mean that the system is not available for global leverage, but that will be determined as we go along in terms of it. And I'll highlight certain areas where that feasibility is enabled in this system. Keep in mind, it's a pilot. We're transitioning over. We're in the process of scaling. First slide, please. We might have 20 minutes, right? So, okay. Next slide, please. So the system I'm going to talk to you about is called the African Union AU3S, or African Union Smart Safety Surveillance. Smart here doesn't actually imply in any way that it's much more intelligent than any other system. It actually implies something quite different. It means it's going to be fit for purpose. The system has to be smart enough that the principles that are used globally can be used locally and regionally. That's what we're aiming for here in terms, because taking another system and force-fitting it into a sovereign member state may not be realistic. So that's why we called it smart, because it has to cater for global principles, but then it also has to cater for what goes on locally. On the left-hand side, you will see challenges in African countries, and I don't think any of this is new to any of you. There are sometimes limited. There are safety data packages that go to African regulators vary hugely, often for the same product and from the same company. So if we talk again across some of the countries, you will see that the data packages are not the same data packages. That may be partly because of the reflection of guidelines and what's in place, but the science has to remain intact. Also because of systems in countries, this low AE reporting. Another key piece is, this is not just unique to Africa. I've seen it in other countries and high-income countries, where the vaccination program or the healthcare, say it's TB or malaria, because these are public health programs, there are institutions and entities within the country that are also responsible for collecting the safety data. And these are sometimes completely separate to the regulator. So it's not an assumption that these two need to be joined up. So for example, if you look at vaccines, the EPI group in a country is responsible for giving the vaccine and having that first entry point and contact with the patient. So if you're collecting safety data, they're a really critical stakeholder. So we also looked at this within this project to make sure that any siloed systems were actually brought together because there were varying variability in different countries in terms of how regularly they spoke, on how regularly they interacted when it came to safety data. Last but not least is capacity. On the right-hand side is what I think is key, and you'll see principles of this throughout the next 10, 15 minutes when I'm sharing with you. The AU3S program is a 10-year program. We've essentially pitched this as a 10-year program, although the first trajectory would be 5 years and the second 5 years. Because anything less would not be realistic to build a continental end-to-end safety system. For those of you in industry, and I come from industry, it takes years for us to build a functional safety system. Here we are going into a whole continent and multiple jurisdictions. So we pitched it at least as a 10-year program. Looking at the progress we've had, we're on track for it, and I'll share a little bit more in that context. Very simple principles here, right? At the highest level is to improve medicines and vaccine safety for patients in Africa. And we've added the word globally there because we saw in the COVID vaccine that sample size for ethnic data sometimes can be quite small. So therefore, having a large sample size elsewhere that if a regulator needs to connect, at least the opportunity is there. So it can be shared globally at the discretion of each regulator. We need to strengthen the PV expertise because that's one of the gaps. but probably the 3 and 4 are the largest piece. In this program, it was really designed for enabling African ownership. Everything that has been done here has really been focused around the regulators in Africa looking at their own systems and making their own decisions. You will see in the next slide, organizationally, how that's been set up. And what became, sorry, can you just go back? Thank you. And what, if we do 1, 2, and 3, then I think indirectly, it will increase confidence in trust for public health safety. The African data is really important. What we learned during COVID was the public are not interested in safety data in other parts of the world. They were often asking the regulators, how does this vaccine interact? How does it impact our people in our country? So it's also an interesting take that we have taken from COVID to make sure that perspective of confidence is really important. Next slide, please. This is a really important slide because I've packed quite a lot here, and this will be a good segue for the other slides. So if you look at the highest level in terms of number 1, those 5 countries were what we called our core countries that were entry point countries: Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Ethiopia. This group was brought together in 2020, second quarter, third quarter 2020. So we're not talking a long time ago. If you recall, the COVID waves were, a lot of the data was initially available in the high income countries, but as we started going into Africa, data was beginning to emerge. So these 5 countries were targeted for several reasons. Just to give you a high level, they were also, some of these were at that point entry point countries for the COVAX strategy in WHO. South Africa, for example, has a huge clinical trial base in terms of experience, and we thought we'd tap into it. Ghana has similarly other areas, Nigeria. So we brought all 5 together. That's the original group that set it up, and we tested a pilot. The second wave, which was really approved just last week, we had a steering committee meeting last week, face-to-face. We meet twice a year. They were brought in for different reasons again, because they were critical countries, in terms of contribution to the continental. So you'll see Rwanda, Senegal, Egypt, and DRC. Between those 9 countries, we have already hit the regional representation. For those of you who are not aware, there are 5 regional economic communities in Africa. So we started with representation from the 5 regional committees as a startup to cover the continental coverage. As of last week again, we have added 3 more countries: Mozambique, Tanzania, and Uganda. These countries requested, they came forth with the expression of interest to want to join. So collectively, we have 12 countries here. Can you just hit the return button here, please? Hello? No, please go back. There should be no, sorry. There should be a animation there on that slide. So if you just press down arrow key, you don't need to go back by slide, just do return, please. Whoever is managing the slide. Nope. Okay, thank you. So these additional 3 countries bring in Northern Africa, Western Africa, and Central Africa. And we are also looking, there is an additional 3 countries to these 3. So there will be 6 in this group. The names are not up here just now because it was just, last week was when we agreed, the steering committees. So we'll be doing outreach. So there'll be 6 countries here, including an island state. Now, island states important to mention because very often when these initiatives are starting out, there are a number of island states that belong to the continent of Africa and are sometimes left out. So we made a conscious decision here to also bring in an island state. Can you hit return again here, please? Not next slide. So in short, we actually have covered the 5 regional communities with 9 countries. The additional 6 countries will be backup for the regions. We have launched the whole program in 3 languages to cater for these 15 countries eventually. And the population of these 15 countries will effectively cover about 70% of the continent. So really important to say, and at this point, we are going to pause the program because it is quite a lot and many of the goals have been achieved. It doesn't mean we're going to stop it. We're going to make sure that we now scale carefully in a thought through way. Next slide, please. Sorry, let's stay on this slide. Go back. So there's a secretariat, that's the AUDA, the African Union Development Agency. We have, in Africa, there are 2 WHOs. There is AFRO and AMRO, which takes care of Eastern Mediterranean in the north. So those 2 are advisors. You know, participation is up to them, but they are invited and they're members. AFRO is quite active. And the technical partners, there's MHRA and FDA. That was done specifically by purpose because we wanted 2 regulators in there to be sort of peers / buddy regulators that sort of sandwiches the 5 countries originally and provide a lot of technical support. Then Gates Foundation is both a thought partner and a funder. Really important to say MHRA has played a really critical role here supporting this, and so has the FDA. Steve Anderson, from the head of safety and epidemiology, sits on the steering committee together with his colleague Gopa. And we also have additional 2 members from his safety team, including the head of PV, sitting in the technical groups as well to support on the technical side. So this piece has really has expanded considerably from the FDA. And we're very grateful to both to the FDA and MHRA for giving their support. For the last, this has been going on for about 3 years now. So it's been really encouraging to see the growth in support. Next slide, please. Okay, 3 areas here. The top pillar you see, you'll all be familiar with it: collection, storage and analysis, signal management, decision-making, and communication. Key component is communication now in safety that's been identified. So we're also focusing all 5 are imperative in the critical path. What we do in every country is we look across those 5 and we make sure that each of those is functional. The reality is there's always something there already. It's basically tweaking it to make sure for number 3. Number 3 is where we work across countries. Number 2, in country. Number 3, cross country. And this is probably a very important contribution. We developed a cloud-based database, which is basically a copy of the MHRA database, which is a shell. That enables it's E2B compliant, the right dictionaries are there, so we don't have to worry about interoperability internationally and within countries. We created this cloud-based database, which is called the Data Integration Signal Detection System, DISD. And then on the right-hand side, very critically is the resource. We set up a AU3S joint signal management group. If you go to the next slide, I'll tell you very briefly what is between these 2.
Raj, can I interrupt briefly and give you a time check, just so you know?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I started at 10:10, right? So I'll keep this going. Thank you.
Yeah.
So country is comfortable. So this is the process we use. Country is comfortable with overall program. They understand the landscape. We identify where we need to tweak. We tweak it. We align with the countries in terms of how we tweak it. Then the countries have received the support and we launch. They are now able to participate. Next slide, please. So there is a slide when I talked about the joint signal management. It's a very important component or DNA of the whole AU3S system. The data sits in the cloud base. It gets validated by the Secretariat with support from MHRA as well as the national representatives, but largely by the national representative. MHRA helps cut the data for us. And then it goes on to the JSM committee. And here the committee is very similar to the EU prac setting. So it looks at it, it determines whether it makes, is there any concerns here, any items of interest that needs to be done. They share their cross-country knowledge. So here's a really good example because it's 2 members from each NRA as well as the EPI. So this is why we bring the 2 entities together in a single committee. And the members from the are all from the country PV committees from 5. This is the initial group that we set up. So we can see many of the principles of PRACA here, but they are shaped for fit for purpose for the African need. Key message here is it's very much enables sort of African evidence-based decision-making, and which means it's African ownership. So they own their data, they make their decisions on it. So really key component here because the volume is quite significant. Next slide, please. So if I am making sure I'm looking at time here very quickly, these are the 5 countries that originally went through this process. Can you go to the next slide? We are currently adding these countries in, so there's a lot of discussion going on and how the future for this would work, because that decision was only made last week. And we're looking at ways to decentralize some of the management of cross-country signals, but also keep the AU PROC as a single. So we've changed the name to the JSM to the AU PROC, and we're looking at ways on the Secretariat, how do we bring in centers of excellence so that we divide and conquer the work. Next slide, please. This is what we have as of last week, as of the 21st of August, 44.6K of data. These are validated, pure African AEFIs for all of the COVID vaccines. And what is really important here is to say that 13% of this total 44.6 came directly from patients, and they were then validated. So the quality of what we're getting also from patients is notable here in that context. Next slide, please. Some transparency on how the data is seen by the JSM. And it's interesting because as they were looking through this, if you look at company 6, many of these what we call class level expected AEs were not listed in the SMPC. So this really gave them a lot of insight in terms of how to manage the product, even with the companies. Next slide, please. So key pieces is that on the right-hand side, you will see, that's what I want to focus on. There was a 15% increase because we did a baseline before we kicked this off. And you can see 16 items of interest was identified at the height of COVID, but then they were very consistent with what they were seeing globally on the UMC database, because they're also checking this against global and information fed by both the MHRA and FDA. So all in all, gave them a lot of confidence on how to manage it. Next slide, please. So these are some of the requirements for a country to join. They need a policy and legal framework to collect safety data. This DG or the CEO is the member of the steering group. It is not delegated to anyone. And if they can't do that, then the membership is not so far. Everyone has agreed in writing that they will, as heads of agency, participate. Existing system, E2B compliant data sharing agreement, really important for what we discuss later. And then you can see the rest of it is pretty straightforward, including the second last bullet, where all of this has helped several of the countries to actually reach maturity level 3. And the CEOs have actually openly acknowledged it. Next slide, please. Mandate for this is coming from the African Union, the Science and Technology Committee. So we have a legal mandate to call upon this. We did this right at the beginning, because without a mandate for the continent, this would not have been possible. Next slide, please. This is somewhat the short-term, medium-term. You'll get the slides, so you'll get a feel. But where we are now focusing is on the database and the digital toolbox. The long-term piece is fully functional and sustainable pharmacovigilance system. And on the left-hand side is all the new products, therapeutics, and vaccines that will now be added to the COVID vaccines database. Next slide, please. Because this is a continent, the Continental Working Group as was set up really to transition from the pilot. And you'll see here all of the 7 areas that we're focusing on. But one piece I want to point out is the sustainability and finance. There's active work now being done, how to make this sustainable from a financial perspective as well, both at a member state level, but also at the regulator level. Next slide, please. But slightly different, we're bringing in the EverF is a clinical trial platform at the continental level in Africa. And there was a recommendation from the technical committee to bring AU3S into EverF. So we're currently looking at how to do that. And basically, it will be a link between pre-licensure and post-approval safety data. It's just been started. I just thought I'll share that with you in terms of a decision at the continental level. Next slide, please, and it should be coming on to the last slide. We have achieved this not by working alone, and I think that's the key message that, in the context of what Wim said earlier. We have had diverse stakeholder engagement. Key pieces, we started small and then started building layers and layers on top of it. I think with that, I think this should be the end. Wim, sorry, I went over by 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Raj, for this very interesting presentation. We will move to our next speaker. Questions to both Raj and Flora. We will take them after Flora's presentation. So Flora, over to you.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Vim, please confirm if I'm audible.
You are very audible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. As said, I'm Flora. I'm the pharmacovigilance unit manager within SAPRA. So based on what Raj has actually shared with you, I will then come with the country perspective in terms of how did we then maneuver through COVID, being the participant within the AU3S. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. So as highlighted by Raj, I'm just going to add on top of the challenges that she has highlighted. So on a baseline level, prior to COVID, the challenges that we faced, in addition to what Raj has indicated, it was in terms of the limited reporting. So in terms of the limited reporting, the challenges included lack of reporting tools. So at that point in time, we only had the manual reporting form where we did not have an app. Awareness and training in terms of pharmacovigilance was at its lowest, and then the type of reports that we actually received were of poor quality. And then in terms of the resources capacity within house, the case assessment and feedback to reporters was not even an activity that we were doing internally. Capacity to also analyze the data we collected so that we're able to identify signals was not part of the activities that we did. Committing of reports that were received, it was at its lowest because we had a limited number of people that would actually work on these reports as we receive them so that they can be shared on the VG base. And the benefit risk assessment capabilities within the unit were also not there. So we relied mostly on the external advisory committee members who then would do the reviews of the benefit risk assessment in terms of the PSUR and the RMP documents. And one of the things that I needed to highlight is the pharmacovigilance budget. I believe this is a challenge to all LMICs. So we did not necessarily have any budget that were pharmacovigilance activities. Next slide, please. So in addition to what I've highlighted, then COVID-19 as well as it struck came with more challenges. And this included the fact that the public became more aware of medicine safety awareness. So from that point of view, then there was an alarming increase in terms of the number of reports that were actually coming through. And this were obviously of poor quality, and then the need to accommodate patient reporting, as Raj has highlighted, that in terms of the data that we actually have in the DISD at this point in time, we've got more of the patient reporting, and then the myths and the misinformation that actually came with the COVID-19 vaccines also increased, and then there was a need then from the regulators' perspective or point of view to actually attend to those. Media as well at some point did not make it easier, so there was a need then to address these issues as we go along through COVID. But then the limited resources, there was a need then to do case investigations as we received these cases, and then there was no structures that were actually in place to actually do case investigations, because we do have surveillance officers on the ground, but those are particularly for different diseases. For instance, it will be more for EPI programs that were excluding COVID-19 at that point in time. So there was an increase in terms of the workload, because now they had to cover extra other things that were not actually part of their daily activities. There was a need as well to coordinate activities and set up safety advisory committees that would actually assist in terms of the data analysis, as well as the frequency of the meeting. In South Africa, we do have what we call national safety expert a committee for immunizations or for vaccines, which used to sit at least once in a quarter. But then with COVID, then there was a need for the frequency to be changed from a quarterly meeting to a weekly meeting. So all these challenges, they added on top of what I have already highlighted. Next slide, please. However, our participation through the AU3S then came with benefits that actually assisted in terms of addressing a lot of the challenges that I have highlighted. So our participation then became a strategy that actually assisted. And then in terms of the benefits that we actually got from our participation within the AU3S, firstly, Raj has highlighted training. So training has actually increased or strengthened the internal capacity, particularly when it comes to benefit risk assessment, signal detection skills and capabilities, ICSR assessment and feedback. Because previously, as highlighted, we did not necessarily do much with the reports that we received, but then follow on to the participation in the AU3S, then we had budget that actually appointed extra resources that would assist in terms of follow on with the reporter so that we can get enough information so that then the case can have meaningful or can add towards the meaningful decision making, regulatory decision making. So as well internally, we had developed the signal detection capabilities. We had SOPs. Then we started having our own internal discussion on the issues that we're having internally, not necessarily on COVID-19 vaccines related issues only, but any other medicine related. So follow on to that, we carried on with that. And we also doing the reviews of the RMPs and the PSURs internally, because with the training that came with participation or as a member of the AU3S, from the experience and the learnings that we got from the MHRA, then helped us to build capacity internally. Then secondly, it was with regards to access to tools. So as highlighted, we did not have any app at that point in time. However, our participation with the AU3S then came with an added advantage of access to reporting tools. And that actually came at the right moment, because that's the time when there was a need then for patients to also share their reports in the comfort of their homes, because as we all know, during COVID, it was not necessarily possible for people to move around. So if you had an app, then it made it easier for people to actually report at the comfort of their homes. So that as well, the signal detection system that came with it as well, the joint signal management group, where then we will sit with other country members and discuss signals, that actually assisted as well to intensify on the skills that we have received from the training, and as well as making sure that the reports that we have received, then we make good use of them as intended. Then further on to that, the promotion of the ADR and AFI reporting with the MedSafety app, then we were able to update or include the adverse events following immunization reporting form, so that the public then they are able to report, as well as the patient specific form, because as we all know, the language for healthcare professionals and for the public would not necessarily be the same. So we need to make it easier for patients to understand the tools that we have in the system. And the nice thing about the app is that it's an interactive, therefore there's immediate feedback to acknowledge the report, to say we have received it. So that as well, it came as an added advantage, because then the patient, they would realize, or the reporter, they would realize that at least my report has been received and something is going to be done with that kind of an app of report. And additionally, the language translations that comes with the app as well is an added advantage. So these are some of the benefits that we have enjoyed. Then thirdly, collaboration. As highlighted by Raj, so this is amongst 5 countries, which now has been expanded as indicated. So the use of big data that are coming from different countries actually added value, because as a single country, you might not be able to identify and signal easily. However, if it's a big data, then it makes it easier to identify the signals. Opportunity to learn from others, because as we go, we discuss the challenges that we're facing as countries, and then sharing then assist us to actually go back and look at the system and see how we can actually improve our system. So we learned a lot, and then we went back and looked at how we do things and improve the systems. So as well as the strengthening of the existing collaboration with the EPI. So as Raj has highlighted, this has been a work that actually has been included, the NRA and the EPI. So we worked very closely, and we were part of the joint signal management group together so that we can discuss this activities. Sharing of data in real time as well, because through the app, then we were able to provide the National Department of Health access into this report so that as they come, then they can be channeled to provinces and districts for investigation so that they can come later to the National Immunization Safety Expert Committee for causality assessment. Then in terms of awareness, the launch of the MedSafety app, we made sure that we actually make it a big event where the media was actually involved, and then everybody then got to know about the MedSafety app being available. We continue then to do a lot of webinars where we actually talk to the app so that the public would be aware of the app, and then training of healthcare professionals as well in partnership with the EPI so that they know how the app would work, what is it that is required when they submit, and then what is the process of reporting, follow on to that, and as well as the investigation, what kind of information would also be required. And then lastly, as highlighted, the sponsorship that came with our participation in the AU3S, this assisted in terms of prioritizing pharmacovigilance activities, including training, for example, and the opportunities to increase human resources. Next slide, please. However, as for any program, there would be challenges as you implement it. So the same happened with our participation in the AU3S. So firstly, the integration and harmonization with the in-country system was a bit of a challenge because now it came at the point where we actually needed it, but there was no opportunity then to see the integration thereof with the existing system. For example, the EPI, they had their own requirements, which we were not fully meeting them in terms of the MedSafety app. Operationalization challenges in terms of the gadgets. The healthcare professionals in certain instances, they would indicate that they cannot use their personal gadgets for reporting. There's a need then for other things to be looked at. The data issues, this is not a data-free app as yet. However, we're working on that so that the patients, healthcare professionals would be able to submit the reports. But you are able to send a report, but it would only reach us once you are connected to a Wi-Fi. So those are some of the challenges that we actually came across. Feedback to reporters or facilities. One of the facilities indicated that as a healthcare professional, submit a report to the regulator, they do not get a report of that so that they can have record for it. Because in South Africa, reporting for facilities is one of the quality requirements. So they need proof that this facility is actually reporting. So these are some of the things. The inability of the system to provide various access levels to users, native languages not being part of it at the beginning, and the data protection laws, whereby then certain information would not be provided, particularly by the MHs because of the data protection law. So these are some of the challenges that we came across. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of the lesson that we learned, first thing is that collaboration or harmonization is key in ensuring that we have improved and it leads to resilient systems. So from the reporting tools point of view, we learned that it's important that we make sure that the reporting tools are easily accessible, as we have tried with the MedSafety app, easy to use and customized to local languages, because then that becomes a barrier in terms of reporting for those who do not understand English, because English is the main business language in South Africa. So it's also key to take into consideration the other local languages that are spoken. Feedback to reporters or from reporters is key, because through the feedback that we have received from reporters, then we were able then to request that we have a desktop version of the MedSafety app, which is going then to accommodate healthcare professionals in facilities so that they can report without using their personal gadgets and their personal data. So it's something that our technical supporter has actually worked on. And then, as Raj said, last week we had a meeting where they were showcasing their desktop version. So it's very important that we also listen and respond to the feedback that we receive from our reporters. And then the joint reviews that we had, the learnings amongst regulators has actually been key in improving our systems, and the validations of signals has actually assisted, because then the reports that we are receiving, then we know they have value towards not only South Africa, but Africa as a whole and globally. And then one of the important things that's quite key is having a trusted technical support like the MHRA, who have already been there and done it. So that actually provided a lot of guidance and making sure that the program is sustainable as we move forward. Next slide, please. So in closing, this is my last slide. What is the value that we have seen from our participation in the AU3S? Firstly, support informed benefit risk decision relevant to local settings. Raj has indicated that this is data for Africa by Africans. So bringing it home to South Africa, I want to highlight that in a meeting that we had last week, our DDG from the National Department of Health has actually highlighted how the information that was coming from our participation in AU3S is being used in court for certain cases that they have. So this becomes very relevant then to say, this actually is informing the benefit risk decisions on the local setting. So our participation now is actually being escalated somewhere. So this was an unintended outcome, which is of benefit to the country as a whole. And then secondly, maintaining public confidence in medicine safety and supporting uptake of public health intervention. As highlighted, there has been a lot of COVID-19 vaccine misinformation and myths around it. However, when the people see and you provide feedback in terms of the information or in terms of the data that you're seeing, being part of that, it makes it easier then for the public to have confidence in the program itself and the uptake of vaccines then, so that they support public health interventions. And then thirdly, enable access to innovative treatments, tackling rather, not taking, major public health challenges. So it assists from that point as well. And then from the SAPRA's point of view, immediately improved and strengthened system supporting attainment of WHO maturity level 3. So as you may be aware that SAPRA is currently at maturity level 3 for vaccines. So this has actually taken us to that level to say our participation within the AU3S has actually assisted us, because it came with all other things that we have been can add to strengthen the pharmacovigilance. So this is the value that we have actually gained through our participation in AU3S. And I think this is my last slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Flora. And over to the audience, because we now have time for our Q&A session. And I would like to highlight that at the end of 3 sessions, we will have a panel, or at the end of 2 sessions, really, our 3rd session focuses on the panel discussion, but we may not be able to have Raj long for that session. So if anyone has any specific questions, of course, to both Flora and Raj, now is the time, but bear in mind that Raj may not be there for the panel session. And I am looking at the chat to see if there are any questions, and anyone, please use the Q&A functionality. And maybe I can kick it off with one question, Raj, for you. You mentioned that the 3S is a 10-year program. After that, can we expect that this collaboration will be a default collaboration between the participating countries more broadly for pharmacovigilance or vaccines? Or can you say anything about that, maybe?
Absolutely. Let me, yeah. Can you hear me okay, Wim?
Yes.
Okay. You know, in the slide I showed, we set up a continental working group, a subset. So each member state nominated 2 of their best experts they have to help shape the transition from the pilot to the continental platform. As part of that continental platform, there is a whole module I called out on that around sustainability and financing, looking at fees, looking at what member states need to contribute. So that work has just been kicked off when we're looking at different, and we are also talking to other regulators, you know, in terms of how they keep it going. So there are 3 components I think you want to think at a high level in terms of sustainability. There is the process and procedures part of it, and the mandate. I think that is more or less being set up, right, in that context. So all of the stuff that we talked about earlier and Fora talked about, those are all the DNA of the process and procedures. There's loads of terms of reference and SOPs that we have borrowed from other agencies to set all of this up. So I think that is somewhat fairly mid. It's no longer in terms of growth. I think it's somewhere at mid-level growth and will continue to grow. Then you need people. The people part will need funding, and many of the countries are already looking at that in different ways to see how we're not giving a lot of funding for people in this program. There isn't a lot. There's a minimal to help coordination and activities. Most of the work has gone on the technology piece, making sure we build a bridge between the local system and the cloud-based system. So it's technology and people resources. So some of that's already been addressed, and again, moving forward. The third piece is really important. That's the funding. So what is the run rate to run a platform like this? Because essentially it's a data platform too. So we're also looking at all of that in terms of how it goes. But one piece there that I didn't mention is currently the thinking is, and the discussions have started, this AU3S will potentially, and I use the word potentially because we haven't actually signed off anything yet, would be the PD arm for ARMA as it moves forward. With one caveat, the AU3S serves the whole continent, and ARMA's membership right now isn't all members yet. So the goal here is to make sure it serves ARMA and it serves the continent. So they're all work in progress. Some is already in place. Others we are working quite actively with. But the goal is hopefully before 10 years, this is up and running and managed by the member states, either through the continent, ARMA, or AU, as well as the NRS. The secret here is we didn't put in too many headcount. So it works with the existing resources. As Fora said, I think it's that capacity strengthening of the existing workforce that's there. And that was somewhat done by design too.
Thank you. Any other questions? I see a hand.
Yes, me, Wim. Raj, at the moment, the programs for vaccines, is there any plans to expand that to other products?
It was on my slide. I rushed it through a little bit.
Oh, sorry.
My slide there on the expansion. There is, you know, what we did was we grew bottom up. We asked all the countries to name therapeutics and other vaccines that are of public health interest for them. And then we brought it bottom up to the top, and then we rationalized it. So we came up with a list. I think HIV is there, TB is there, malaria is there for vaccines as well as therapeutics.
Okay.
Polio is there. So it's interesting to see what came out of it actually hits the spot in terms of what public health needs, both for novel products as well as existing products.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. I don't think we have any other questions. I understand, Raj, you responded to a question in the chat. So with that, I would like to move on to our next session. Again, a big thank you to Flora and Raj. There will be a panel session at the end as a reminder, but I would like to hand over to my colleagues Jayesh and Benita for our next session. Go ahead.
Thank you, Wim. Good morning to all. Good afternoon. We have one more very interesting session coming up, so I'm happy to have you all with us. We start now, yes, but you could quickly grab a cup of coffee in between as you hear us. And for me, it's absolute pleasure to introduce my co-moderator for this session, and that is Benita Morar. Benita is the Middle East Africa PV Partnership Lead for AbbVie. She's a highly skilled professional with 16 years of pharma experience at the industry, and before devoting her time to pharmacovigilance, she worked in quality assurance for Reckitt and Ranbaxy. A lot of pleasure, Benita. Welcome on board.
Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Jayesh. And if I may introduce Jayesh, so he is the PV country head and QPPV for Bayer Pharmaceuticals, based in Kenya, and he coordinates PV activities across Northwest Africa. Jayesh also at the Kenya Association of Pharmaceutical Industries has recently chaired the PV and medical committees. So Jayesh is our chair for today, and please welcome Jayesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Benita. So let me quickly jump straight into the session for today. Very interesting, where we are looking at inspections and inspection-related activities in pharmacovigilance, and with an angle on the new developments around QPPV training. So with that, my first speaker for today, we have Dr. Helen Bomire Dagije, who's joining us from Uganda. And I have the pleasure of introducing Helen to everyone. Helen is a pharmacist who holds a PhD from the Université Catholique de Louvain in Belgium. She is the Director for Product Safety at the National Drug Authority, that's the health authority in Uganda, where the National PV Center is based. And she's a patient safety advocate and serves on the Patient Engagement Special Interest Group on ISOP. And she's also our ISOP Africa chapter's president currently. A lot of papers written by Helen, right? And a lot of accreditation that she serves as being the head there for CPD, continuous professional activities for nurses, midwives, and dispensers. And at the East Africa community level, she's a member of the Pharmacovigilance and Post-Market Surveillance Expert Working Group, working alongside as an accessor as well with WHO for the global benchmarking tool. Over 20 peer-reviewed publications to her name, and a personal friend that I've known for a very long time. Welcome, Helen. Session's yours.
Yes, thank you, Jayesh, for that very kind introduction. And good morning, everyone online. Yeah, my session is simple. I'm talking about specifically good pharmacovigilance practice inspections that have been done in Uganda. Next slide, please. I'll begin with a brief introduction about legal requirements. The National Drug Policy and Authority Act that establishes NDA is responsible for the safety, quality, and efficacy for medicines in the country. Has regulations responsible for pharmacovigilance, and in those regulations, a licensed person shall have an appropriate system for pharmacovigilance to manage safety of the data for the drugs for which the licensed person is responsible. And also that regulation specifically says that it describes the appropriate mechanism for monitoring the safety of medicines, and specifically for manufacturers that are manufacturer or importer of drugs, who is licensed to do so under the Act, and regulations should have this system. And this is mainly for market authorization holders and importers, because Uganda is imports majority of the medicines, maybe more than 70–80% of medicines are imported. So that is the background to which this GVP inspection was done, the legal background. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay. Now the drug authority, National Drug Authority, has some experience, in fact, a lot of experience when it comes to GMP inspections, and is the regulatory center of excellence for this, according to in the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative. So with that background, almost all the technical people participate in GMP inspections. So also specifically for the pharmacovigilance staff, they also participate in other inspections apart from GMP. They also do GCP inspections. Most of them, there is always that cross-pollination of skills. So we have about 8 officers who are specifically dedicated for pharmacovigilance, and they have all been qualified in health sciences, and most of them, in fact, have at least a master's of science. So we have got also specific training for GVP inspections, but this mainly occurred online, virtually during COVID, and or theoretically. And but we've also had previously secondments and placements to specifically Swissmedic and other regulatory, stringent regulatory authorities. Also, USFDA had a training with us, but for Swissmedic, there was a placement. Next slide, please. So yes, I talked about the regulation, but now we have, in terms of the regulation, we've developed guidelines for the pharmacovigilance systems. We have procedures for conducting these inspections, and we've also had tools for conducting the inspections conducted. We had a checklist, we had a report template, and then we also conducted sensitization of market authorization holders on these intended GVP requirements. In the process, we are amending our act to improve provisions for the GVP inspections, because the one we have currently is not very specific to GVP, and that's why we conducted a pilot for these inspections, such that as soon as this amendment, which is in its near final stage, comes up, we'll be able to, hit the ground rolling, running. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. So we did 4 pilot inspections earlier this year, and well, they were routine inspections. GVP is new across most of Africa. It's a new concept, so we tried out this, and the inspection with the training that we've had and experience with other inspections, the inspection teams were structured to include a lead inspector and others, and then the objectives was basically for capacity building for the pharmacovigilance officers to get practical skills, and also to support the local technical representatives, which is the representatives of the market authorization holders, to improve the existing systems and also to comply to the pharmacovigilance regulations. Next slide, please. So in the pilot inspections, the key aspects we examined, we looked at the organizations and responsibilities of the pharmacovigilance departments. We looked at the quality management systems, the signal detection and risk minimization strategies, the quality management systems, the operational procedures, personnel training, and the site master file. So we had a number of non-conformances. To understand the system better, we classified this under critical, major, and other or minor. Please, next slide. So some examples of the non-conformances that we found in this, we had, there was no evidence of training for the pharmacovigilance staff. We had no contractual agreements with for outsourced pharmacovigilance activities. We had, in some facilities, there were limited facilities for the implementation of pharmacovigilance systems. In terms of the number of human resource or that were attending to pharmacovigilance activities, and also the resources allocated to pharmacovigilance activities. We had issues like limited initiative to tailor processes and procedures to the Ugandan requirements, because most these were mainly for international. They were international pharma or global pharma. And then there was also no verifiable evidence to indicate that the QPPV participates in the review of local signals. And this was also not stated in their job description in some cases, and also the safety review section of the PMSF. So also the other thing is that the job description for the QPPV didn't indicate the roles, that the role of post-authorization safety studies conducted locally, or the involvement of the QPPV. Next slide. Also, delegation of tasks in the PMSF was not specifying the tasks for each role in the organizational structures. There was limited evidence to support the implementation of the local pharmacovigilance system. And this was seen in the distribution records for reporting tools, in the safety reports, in the database. There was limited presence, as well as local safety data in the periodic safety update reports. So we realized that the QPPV is not really also involved in this signal management for signals generated from Uganda, and then there was no procedure in place to evaluate the effectiveness of the safety communication systems. Next slide, please. So in summary, the challenges are there is on the part of the market authorization holders and the regulators is that the capacity, the technical capacity, both to the number of people or technical personnel involved in implementing GVP and or conducting the GVP inspections was limited. And then there is also the inadequate structures for the local market authorization holders. And then the interpretation and classification of the non-conformances was still also work in progress. And the evaluation criteria is not existent to assess the competence of the QPPVs. We don't have a specific who can like criteria of who exactly can be a QPPV and so on. And then the regulatory persons appointed QPPV, the regulatory personnel, people who've been doing regulatory work in the companies, we are now being appointed as QPPVs, and their work burden was not assessed to see if they can do that. And then in the, of course, in the legislation, I had talked about that we are working on now, we're in the final stages of our law or act amendment. So there is, and the issue of fees is still an issue, that the responsibilities, who takes the responsibility for fees regarding GVP inspections, and then there was no provision also for for the past studies. And for the LTR, the local technical representative system facilitates multiple representation of market authorization holders by a single QPPV. And this, of course, is a challenge for us. And the diverging pharmacovigilance systems and knowledge and experience from the market authorization holders was also something that needs to be addressed in the new in the regulations when we come up with them. Please, next slide. Yeah, so in terms of the way forward, we hope to when the new regulation has come up, we hope to schedule based on a risk assessment. We realize that there are different grades or levels of understanding of the system, and we need to concentrate on where there's highest risk. And then there is also, we need to support inspected facilities also to implement their corrective action. For example, since we did maybe like since January or for 4 or 5 months, we have not received full implementation from all of the companies. We've only received from some, or proposals of what needs to be done, closing off of the inspection. And then there is, we also need to design criteria for evaluating the QPPV and accept and knowing who or not to accept to do, to represent a QPPV. And then there is also to engage with the local manufacturers, with the local market authorization holders concerning the establishment of the pharmacovigilance structures in a separate system, because the understanding is not at the same level. And then they take advantage of the existing regional blocks. For example, the ESA block or eager to pool resources and conduct joint GVP inspections. And also conducting research as we, operational research as we implement this GVP framework in Uganda will be a useful thing. And also to amend our regulations, of course, to include the fees to facilitate GVP inspections, the regulatory action against non-compliant facilities will only come out in the proposed regulation, and also the requirements for past studies. Next, I think that's the end. Yeah, thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Helen. Benita, are you there? Would you like to take it from
Hi.
here?
Yes. Okay, so our next speaker is going to be Martha Mandale. Martha is the Principal Regulatory Officer at the Pharmacy and Poisons Board in Kenya. She is currently responsible for safety monitoring of authorized health products and technologies in Kenya. Martha has extensive experience in healthcare management as well as regulatory system strengthening. So please welcome Martha to enlighten us on QPPV training in Kenya. Over to you, Martha.
Thank you so much, Benita, for that introduction. So I think we'll just move over to the presentation since you have already introduced me well. So I'll take you through, qualified person for pharmacovigilance training in Kenya. Next slide, please. So I just needed us to appreciate perhaps, the development of the PV system, improvements on it, where we came from, where we are at right now in Kenya. So in 2004, that was the first time that the PV pharmacovigilance unit was established at the PPB. And I'm so happy to, inform you that one of our moderators of this session, Dr. Jayesh Pandit, was actually a pioneer in establishment. He was very, very key because this is when pharmacovigilance really started in Kenya. And then now in 2006, thereabout, we had now development of the first PV guideline. It has also undergone several revisions just to, get it updated with the expanding scope of PV. In 2009, we actually had the formal launch of the national PV system. So those lots of, PV training to the healthcare professionals. There was, development of those pharmacovigilance reporting tools and lots of sensitization done. And then now in 2010, Kenya became the 98th full member of the WHO Program for International Drug Monitoring. And in between 2010 to 2014, PPB collaborated with the University of Nairobi, together with support from, the Management Sciences of Health. There was a launch of the master's program in pharmacoepidemiology and pharmacovigilance, and I am actually a beneficiary of this course. In 2013, remember we had, development of our first reporting tools in 2009. We only had 2 reporting forms, one for, adverse drug reactions, the other for suspected poor quality. And we felt like we need to embrace technology, put this on an online platform. So we had those 2 forms actually onboarded on the electronic platform. Come, to 2021, we upgraded the electronic platform. As I said, it is important that the NRAs also, adopt to the expanding scope of pharmacovigilance. So now we have medication errors reporting form. We have the medical device incidents reporting form. And, we just, had to adopt to the expanding scope of PV. In 2022, we launched an app for reporting, and that is the same time also we had gazettement of the PV and PMS rules. I think what I've skipped here is 2014, when Kenya was designated as the Regional Center of Regulatory Excellence in PV by AUDA. So we take the lead in PV in the EAC, that is East African Community, and also the IGAD. 2019 is the first time we actually had our guidelines for the establishment of the QPPV. And then now what we have done is 2023, we actually conducted our first QPPV training, of course, in collaboration with the University of Nairobi. Next slide. So it's important that you have legal backing for any PV-related activities in country. So what we have, the establishment of the PPB in itself is through the Pharmacy and Poisons Board Act, Cap 244 laws of Kenya. We realized there was a gap in terms of, pharmacovigilance related activities. So we had rules and regulations enacted. We call them the pharmacovigilance and post-marketing surveillance rules in 2022, where we actually have appointment where we require that the marketing authorization holders appoint a qualified person for pharmacovigilance responsible, and also from just touching on what the previous presenter has touched on, when you have the QPPV, then the regulatory authority also has authority to conduct pharmacovigilance practice inspections. And of course, with the regulations, you need to have guidelines. So one that speaks specifically to the appointment of the qualified person for pharmacovigilance by the marketing authorization holder. So we have the guidelines for qualified person for pharmacovigilance. Next slide, please. So who is a qualified person for pharmacovigilance? I know we are aware, but just to appreciate the definition, is an individual and usually an employee of a pharmaceutical company, whether it is a marketing authorization holder or a local technical representative, who is actually responsible for the safety of human pharmaceutical products marketed by that company in any jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So the general requirements of the QPPV, so this is both in we call them the PV and PMS rules 2022, but also in the guideline for the QPPV. So what is stated therein is that the marketing authorization holder shall permanently and continuously have at his or her disposal an appropriately qualified person responsible for pharmacovigilance, and we require that they reside in Kenya. So, it is also the responsibility of the appointing authority, which is the marketing authorization holder, to ensure that the QPPV receives mandatory refresher GVP training, and it should be from institutions that are actually recognized by the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. And we also require that the QPPV should have knowledge of the Kenyan safety monitoring legislation, guidelines, and also international standards, just to adopt international best practices. Next slide, please. So I think I had already briefly in the initial slides just taken us through what the development implementation of the PV system has been like from 2004. And this one, I just narrowed down to the QPPV course. So first of all, it was important as the PV staff that we also are capacity built on what the qualified person for pharmacovigilance is, what should their training look like. So we had some of our staff actually attend the training. The African Collaborating Center for PV in Ghana do conduct, in collaboration with the Ghana FDA, have a QPPV training that they conduct not only for appointed QPPVs in their country, but also their target audience is participants are usually also from regulatory authorities. So we've had a very good working relationship with the Ghana FDA, and with support also from the AU 3S, AUDA AU 3S program. We had staff who were sponsored for this training, so that now we come back home and implement some of the learnings, including how to conduct the GVP inspections, evaluation of aggregate reports, and so on and so forth. So coming back in country, and because we are the AMRH ARCO for PV, then it is important that we also capacity build in the region. So the PPB in collaboration with the University of Nairobi, then from those learnings and lots of input also from PV champions in country, we were able to develop an in-country QPPV curriculum. We then shared it out to the stakeholders, including the pharma industry. So CAPI is represented here, and the QPPV specialists within the country, and we were able to get very rich input And then we were able to now finally launch, and we conducted our first QPPV training just recently. That was end of May towards June 2023. Next slide. So how does the QPPV course look like? So it's quite, you know, a long course, 2 weeks interactive course. It's currently face-to-face. We hope that we will be able to do this once every year. It consists of 15 modules, and the mode of delivery is lectures. We have small group discussions. We have the participants take, you know, case studies and do a presentation. And, you know, generally it's very, you know, interactive, and lots of lessons, even through practicum. And then now what we have done, just borrowing the model from the learnings that we had, we actually have a field visit to an MAH, and we were really privileged to work together with Novartis Kenya, who were able to offer, you know, learning experience, real-time learning experience to the QPPVs. You know, the participants that we had were both from the local pharma industry and the multinationals, and we appreciate that the local pharma industry is still growing. And so there are those who were actually, you know, have the PV system, you know, just in its initial stages, and there are those who never had any. So it was really a good learning experience just to get to, you know, share on where do we start at the Novartis Kenya Limited. So at the end of the training, the participants get awarded with certificates. Next slide. So some of the modules, I talked of 15 modules, but some of the modules that we touch on basically are as listed. So introduction to, you know, pharmacovigilance, who is the qualified person for pharmacovigilance, just also giving the legal requirements for such in Kenya. What does a quality management system look like in terms of, in relation to, you know, safety monitoring, individual case safety reports, you know, what are those channels that are used for reporting, how does processing look like, you know, data management in terms of, you know, tackling serious adverse drug reactions that are reported. You have medical teams at the MAH who look at such reports, and, you know, signal detection and causality assessment. And you're well aware that as Africa, we want to really venture into vaccine manufacturing. So we have a module on vaccine vigilance, just to let the, you know, participant appreciate what it is about vaccines and the adverse events for immunization. We have aggregate reports, so little bit about PSURs and PBRAs, what is the format like that we require in Kenya, you know, the timelines for such submission, and what we do when we receive, you know, the kind of evaluation that we do, you know, when we receive these aggregate reports at the NRA. The risk management plans, what is the format of the PSMF, you know, signal management, how we do it at the NRA, you know, compared to what is expected also at the MAH level. Safety communication and crisis management, you know, pharmacovigilance, at the end of the day, you need to do lots of communication, whether it is, you know, feedback to those reporters, feedback to the different stakeholders, and what have you. And then now the post-authorization safety and efficacy studies, what is the role of the QPPV, you know, submission of those protocols to the PPB for approval, including interim reports and, you know, final reports and what have you. And then now quality in PV, basically just, you know, QMS, you know, these SOPs that are required and what have you. And then, of course, the pharmacovigilance inspections. What is what we expect at the NRA, that when we come on site, you know, the different types of pharmacovigilance inspections, so much in detail. And on top of these modules, I must add, and I think I didn't put it here, is that we also had a session with one of our QPPV champions who you know, is now a QPPV and does a lot of outsourcing of those services. So the participants were also able to appreciate, you know, out there what it is like, what is the career like as a QPPV. Yeah, so next slide. So the learning outcomes of that QPPV course is that at the end of the training, we expect that, you know, the QPPV would be able to actually design, for those who do not have a system in place, implement an efficient PV system, where they should be able to compile safety reports, close monitor, conduct close monitoring of the products in the market, and, be able to also report to the NRA as prescribed within prescribed timelines and, you know, the prescribed format. And then also monitor the effectiveness of the PV system established. And that means that they are in control, and whatever changes that need to be made as they continue to implement the PV system, then they should be able to implement such changes. So that is what we really are looking forward to. And that's why even when we did our first QPPV training, we really deliberately actually drew participants from the local pharma industry, just to let them appreciate what it is like. Because in as much as we are, capacity building ourselves as the NRA staff, it is also important that we also look around us. What does the local pharma industry, what is the status? Where are they in terms of PV system establishment and, implementation? Next slide, please. So the achievements, it was our first training. We had about 12 participants who, represented from both the local and international pharma companies. And, from this training, we had those who we had trained for those who did not have PV systems in place. They were able to establish the same. And then what stood out for us is basically collaborations with the, teaching institution. I mentioned University of Nairobi, development partners in just towards this implementation, supporting both, training of the PPB, PV, staff, that is AUDA, NEPAD, AU3S program, but also on the ground when we're actually sensitizing, the pharma industry. We received a lot of support from the USAID MTAPs. And then the pharma industry, who were very kind to host us, so Novartis Kenya for the field learning experience towards this implementation of the training. We have actually been able, the other achievement is that we have been able to do a pilot inspection for one of our local pharmaceutical industry. So it's really a learning process as we go. Next slide, please. So these are just photos to appreciate the participants and the training that we had. And next slide. So what does the future look like? So as I said, as an ARCO in PV, we would like to do, capacity building for the qualified persons for pharmacovigilance, not only in country, but also within the region. So there's still lots of training, lots of capacity building that is needed also for the NRA. So within the EAC, EGAD, and generally, even Africa. And of course, as we move, we would like to have more collaborations and partnerships with stakeholders to strengthen, functional and robust PV systems in Africa, just acknowledging AMA and all the PV strengthening, interventions that are in place right now.
Martha, just a quick time check. 1 minute.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so I'd like to acknowledge the University of Nairobi. So this is just an acknowledgement of the partners and the different key players that we have worked together with. And it's just to appreciate their contribution towards this implementation of this QPPV curriculum in Kenya. Next slide. Yeah, so in Kenya, we say asante sana, meaning thank you very much for being attentive. And this is just a photo. You're welcome to come and visit Kenya. We have beautiful white sandy beaches at the coastal region. You can come see wildlife. And yeah, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Looks amazing. Thank you so much, Martha, for that insightful talk. I now call upon Felix, who is the country patient safety head of Novartis. Felix is also responsible for East and Southern Africa countries, and he will be giving us a short talk on his experience with the QPPV training in Kenya. So Felix, I hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Benita. Hopefully I'm audible. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Felix.
Super. So next slide, Benita. So mine is actually quick. Just sort of to give feedback on how the training was. And the feedback I'm about to provide is collective, mostly from the participants in the training. So it's not just my feeling alone on how the training went. So just as Dr. Matt already mentioned, so this training was a first of its kind in Kenya. And we really applaud the health authority for the efforts and strides we are making towards building a functional PV system in the country. And there are many positives actually to draw from this training. So just as she's mentioned, I'll just reiterate some of the points. I'll not subtracting anything from her presentation. So first of all, something unique that happened is that the curriculum that she shared actually was shared with the industry for comments and input even before the training. And the participants felt that there was a collective sort of feeling that we owned the training. The training was custom made for us, and which is a good thing then. That in whatever initiatives we have, especially around PV, let's get the input of the stakeholders so that then there is that ownership. Then the second aspect was about the participants. As Dr. Martha already mentioned, we had a mix of both foreign and local MAHs. And this provided, I think, an avenue for best practice sharing so that then we could exchange on both fronts, from a local perspective and a foreign perspective on what is happening around pharmacovigilance. And I think especially to local MAHs, it was a very good experience because most of them were at startup stages to setting up their PV systems. And it was really a good learning experience. Then about the sessions, they were well structured actually, including both practical and theoretical experience. Actually, some of my colleagues are just from the feedback that was shared. Whatever we did as practical or whatever exercises we undertook during the session, they actually took and just customized the templates, and are already now working with the templates that we came up with during the practical session. So the sessions were well structured, and kudos to the HA. Then the choice of physical versus online was actually a good thing, because then we had a good platform to form a bond and be able to discuss freely as compared to when the sessions are online. Then regarding the relevance of the agenda, it was actually tailor-made to just enable us comply with the regulations that we have locally, and even some bits on international best practices. And really that will enable us to just comply to the regulations fully as it is, and even set the base then for HA inspections that have already started, as Dr. Mata mentioned. Then regarding the facilitators, I was actually privileged to be both a participant and sort of a facilitator, because I hosted the health authority. I mean, we hosted them in the Novartis Kenya office just to provide a practical perspective on how we are able to comply with the health authority regulations and the structures and frameworks that we've put in place as a company. But then there were other facilitators from all angles, from academia, from the health authority side, and even the industry, so that then the learners will get a whole perspective of what the field of pharmacovigilance is like, which is a good thing. And then the platform that was created from the session was really helpful, because even after the training, we are able to exchange as QPPVs who attended that training. We are able to speak to each other freely, and just even pick a phone and call each other, ask a question on whatever we are stuck with there. And I think that will sort of help us continue sharing, best practice sharing, even beyond the training. Then we upload the HA, because even at the end of the sessions, they actually collected feedback on areas to improve for the next cohort. And I believe the next cohort is actually going to have a better experience, more than even the first cohort. So just a few areas that I can mention of maybe that can be considered for the next cohort. So the number of participants was, we felt like the industry can benefit more from this training, either from increasing the number of cohorts or increasing the number of participants, because upon sharing with the larger industry that a training has happened for QPPVs, many expressed interest and were like, why didn't we have a lot more people included in that training for certification then? So we hope in the next year, we are going to have more participants and or probably more cohorts per year, or in the coming years. Then for purposes of planning, especially for the MAHs, there was a feeling that advance notice needs to be given a month or even 2 months prior to, so that then absence and I mean, just for covering the absence of the QPPVs who are attending the training can be arranged, and also for costs, so that then there are costs affiliated to the training, like transport and hotel and all that. But then also outside of this, because we are very privileged that we didn't pay a coin in the first cohort for this training. And we hope that in the next cohorts, the HA will consider sort of fees that most of the local MAHs can afford, so that we can have many of them trained without having to struggle with paying for attending the sessions. So in the next slide, just to show you a few pictures on how it went. So as you can see, this is just a general picture of the participants. Hope it is clear enough. And the facilitators. So we were happy to share a general picture and it's for memories. And as you can see, we even had a cake for the ladies. I think it's very nicely done, as you can see. And then on the other picture, that is myself receiving the certificate of attendance and of certification as a QPPV. So it is kudos to the health authority. So we expect that the agenda is going to remain as it is. Don't subtract anything. I think it is working, or it works. So we hope for better sessions in the coming years. So kudos, keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Felix. Hand over to Jayesh again to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Benita. And again, thank you, Felix. Very well captured. We are all looking forward to having the opportunity to be trained as well. Kudos to PPB for engaging all your partners in advance. And lovely, health authority giving us a cake. That's the first one from where I come from. So I have immense pleasure now to shift gears as we move to West Africa, to Ghana, and introduce the principal regulatory authority, principal regulatory officer for the FDA in Ghana. That's Adela Ashie. Adela is a pharmacist with over 15 years of experience in PV, and she holds a master's in international health from the University of Nottingham in the UK, and is currently the head of the Vigilance Unit, which is under the Safety Monitoring Department of the FDA, the Health Authority in Ghana. Adela's recent works have been in assisting pharmaceutical companies in Ghana to establish efficient PV systems through the training of QPPVs and the conduct of good vigilance practice inspections since 2016. Welcome, Adela, and yes, take over from here as you introduce to us how the inspection program and future collaboration for Ghana look like. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jayesh, for the kind introduction, and good morning, good day to our participants online. So as Jayesh introduced, my presentation is on the PV inspection program and future collaborations in Ghana. Next slide, please. So we'll be looking at generally how PV in Africa has evolved so far. We'll look at an overview of the PV system in Ghana, then we'll look more into detail on our inspection program, how we've come this far, and then some collaborations that we've been involved in. Next slide, please. So this discussion is very timely because increasingly new medicines are being first introduced into Africa, especially pipeline medicines are coming faster. In the case of pandemics like what we're going through recently, there's limited safety data. So this emphasizes the need for better involvement of the pharmaceutical industry in monitoring the safety of the products. However, it's only in a few African countries that have been able to establish frameworks to implement the good pharmacovigilance practice requirements. So strengthening of country PV systems is important because sometimes PV system information outside the country might not be wholly generalizable. So there's a need for collaboration on the continent to make our PV system stronger and more efficient. It's also good to know that as so far, more regulatory authorities in Africa are involved in PV, global PV activities. As and now we have about 50 of the countries out of the 54 as part of the WHO program for international drug monitoring. Next slide, please. So Ghana, our Food and Drugs Board, that was at the initial name of the regulatory authority, when it was established in 1992, did not have specific requirements for good pharmacovigilance practice activities. So in 2012, our legal mandate was reviewed into the Public Health Act when we became Food and Drugs Board, and the Act made provision for good pharmacovigilance practice activities under the revised requirements under safety monitoring in the country. Next slide, please. So if you look at our act, which is the Public Health Act 2012, Act 851, Part 7 talks about most of the FDA activities regards to food and drugs. Section 125 specifically deals with the safety monitoring of pharmacovigilance requirements for healthcare professionals, patients, and the FDA. But specifically for the industry, Section 1 makes requirement for the MAH or its representative to have a qualified person for pharmacovigilance. Now, this guideline makes it possible for FDA to enforce that every marketing authorization holder in the country has somebody who has oversight responsibility of their PV activities. The subsection 2 under that says that these MAHs will report adverse drug reactions to the Food and Drugs Authority. So then we can also require that MAH do that. Then thirdly, the subsection 3 says that the FDA will be responsible for putting in measures to ensure that the safety of products on the market. And it is under this section that our good pharmacovigilance practice inspection comes under. So that section is explained to include activities that we can implement for safety monitoring to go on well in the country. Now, having these sections alone might not sometimes motivate healthcare professionals or the pharmaceutical industry to report. So if we have another section, that's the section 148, that makes it possible for us to develop guidelines. Now for Ghana, these guidelines are mandatory, meaning that with our guidelines for qualified persons for pharmacovigilance, which describes who a QPPV is, a degree holder, a healthcare professional who has sufficient knowledge and has undergone a QPPV training, it's there. So when you request that an MH have a QPPV, you refer them to that guideline that it is a requirement and they must have somebody who meets these qualifications. And so it's easier to enforce it. We also have the guidelines for PV inspections. And so when the MH says that, okay, we are coming for PV inspection, what I come to look at, we refer them to the guidelines. And that enables them to actually see what is going to be requested for. Apart from that, we also have a higher motivation in the guidelines, which is the 142 section of the Public Health Act. And there we have the penalties, where we can have administrative penalties for marketing authorization holders who do not comply. And we hardly use that, but it's there to make sure that if the MHs are not doing what is required and the safety of the general public will be at stake, then we can actually use those requirements. So in Ghana, reporting by healthcare professionals and patients is voluntary. However, for industry, it is very much mandatory. Next slide, please. So just to give an overview of how FDA's PV system has evolved over the years. So in 1999, that is when we had our formal ICSR connection starting. And most of us will remember that in 2001, FDA joined the WHO program for international drug monitoring. In 2005, we set up our first expert committee who are advising the FDA on safety requirements. Now, what is relevant to our discussion today is 2012, when the law was revised to include the GVP requirements. Between 2012 and 2013, we worked on the development of the guidelines, which will guide both industry and FDA in implementing these requirements, because we could not start enforcing them in vacuum. So that is when we developed those four guidelines for QPPV, where QPPV is, guidelines for good pharmacovigilance practice inspection, what to expect when we can inspect, guidelines for safety monitor of medicinal products that guides MAHs on how to submit their PSUR, RMPs, how to do their post-authorization safety studies, efficacy studies, and all the other requirements that they need to comply with. And guidelines for reporting adverse drug reactions, which is for everybody who has to report adverse drug reaction. Between 2013 and 2015, we had stakeholder engagement where we involved most of the people to understand what is required of them. And that is why we had our first QPP training in 2015 with 12 participants. In 2016, we had the first good pharmacovigilance practice inspection. Most of these were ethical companies. In 2019, we emphasized the need for patient reporting and launched the MedCity app to support reporting by the pharmaceutical industry and patients, and became WHO maturity level 4 at the PV in 2020 and joined AU3S in 2020. Next slide, please. So in implementing our good pharmacovigilance practice requirements, the FDA has organized 12 training for qualified persons for pharmacovigilance in collaboration with academia, and this is organized by the African Collaborating Center for Pharmacovigilance. So within these 12 trainings, we've actually trained 193 QPPVs, and as Martha said, last year they took part in the training, and 106 of these have been designated by the MAHs. We've also had 98 GVP inspections, 17 of them from innovator MAHs and 81 generic companies. And the outcome of these has been that 91 RMPs have been received and reviewed since 2018, and 277 PSURs have been submitted. Next slide, please. So how is our inspection program like? So the inspections are conducted to improve the PV system that is established by the MAH, to ensure compliance with the PV obligations and for the FDA to enforce these requirements. So we can either do them pre-authorization or post-authorization of the pharmaceutical product. We do the inspections in country in Ghana, where we are looking at the system in Ghana and how they're able to collect the safety data and report and use them for decisions for safety of the patient. The inspections could be either routine or unannounced, and based on the scope, based on the objective of the inspection, the type, whether unannounced or announced, and then the inspection history of the marketing authorization holder. Next slide, please. So we also have a risk-based approach to PV inspections. As you can see, we cannot conduct inspections for all these countries. So we look at 4 key indicators when we are looking at scheduling our PV inspection for the next year. The inspection findings, if the company has been inspected before, product-related issues, MH-related issues, and the PV system-related issues. Next slide, please. When we do the inspection, we look at the PV system master file of the company. That gives an overview of how the company's PV system is run. We also look at the QPPV and backup arrangements, how the PV is organized, and how the QPP is related or interacts with the management of the company decision making. We look at sources of safety data, how it is managed, the SOPs and procedures for the PV activities. We also look at the PV system performance, how the company is monitoring these things. We look at the PV contract agreement, what activities are being done by third parties on behalf of the MAH, training of the staff in the Department of PV and other staff, and they also find out if the company has been doing a self-audit. We also look at their storage and archiving system. Next slide, please. So the inspection program, we also have to do classification of the inspections findings. And this is to make sure that the MAH will be able to know the severity of the findings that we have found out, and also ensure uniformity in the assessment of ratings in case different officers go for the inspections. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have critical, if it's the finding directly affect the safety of the patient or is in direct disagreement with our guidelines that we have. It's classified as major if it has potential to affect the safety of the patient. And the minor ones are the findings that are really not expected to affect the safety, but it has to do with a deficiency in the PV system practice or processes. Next slide, please. Over the years, we have had support from our partners to help to build this PV system that we have. So in 2014, we had MHRA training the FDA on review of RMPs and PSRs. This is to make sure that when we actually implement these requirements, we're able to not just collect the RMPs, but we're able to review them and then use them for safety of the patient. We also have been working with PI when it comes to our strengthening of our system, where our staff go for PV fellowship with them under the Global Health Protection Program. We've had support from LAREB with signal management and AU3S for signal management and review of regulatory documents. Next slide, please. Collaboration during the pandemic. So now regulation is going more into collaboration reliance. One of the key collaborations that we've had is with the AU3S project, which is being funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We had the presentation from Dr. Raj earlier on. So with this project, some of the key benefits have been the strengthening of the signal management processes, where we are able to put all our data together in one database and be able to do signal management on that one. What did this was that it strengthened our confidence in the safety data that we had, and so we were able to confidently tell the patients that the vaccines are safe and they could use them. Also strengthen the capacity of the FDA staff and our expert committee members. And one key thing that they also did was support in awareness creation of the patient, and this has improved awareness by the general public on what PV is and the need for them to report. And now, as we learn, there's going to be the expansion to cover other countries and other priority medicines that are going to be introduced into the continent. Next slide, please. Other PV collaboration activities that have been going on has been the WHO Afro Serious AFI management peer review process, where there's an expert committee made up of FDA and Nigeria staff and their WHO representatives who have peer reviewed the processes for managing serious AFIs in both countries. And this has helped identify challenges in the system and how this can be addressed, as well as best practices that can be adopted by the different partners. Currently, there's going to be a training that's going to help the development of harmonized causality assessment procedures. Then in West Africa, there is the PV expert group as part of WAHO, where there's exchange of pharmaceutical data. But most importantly, the PV group is planning on collaborations which involve work sharing. For example, they have worked and developed guidelines which are going to be used for inspections, signal management. And these are guidelines that can be adopted. Now, what this does is that for countries that do not have the capacity to develop these guidelines or implement these ones, having this collaboration, they can rely on other countries that have the capacity and also have the SOPs that they can use to do their activities. Next slide, please. So in the future, what collaborations can we have? The first one will be the data sharing. We must have systems that can help us collect our data into one place and review them for the activities or decision-making when it comes to safety. But there must be data sharing agreements that are there. So we're hoping that the efforts by WAHO to have that PV platform for sharing data will be helpful. We are sharing data, including ICSR, PSURs. There's also need for work sharing in review of regulatory documents. So PSURs, for example, are generalizable to every country. So if one country is able to review it, the information can be shared with other countries for them to make decisions on them. Then we can also have joint good pharmacovigilance practice inspections within the continent, where we have teams from different countries coming together to support the inspection in other countries. What this will do is that there will be knowledge sharing, because we will have a mixture of different levels or capacities of the regulators going into the different countries and supporting them with the inspections. Then knowledge sharing and capacity building. And FDA, we are open to supporting any country that needs help from us, as we've helped train some other regulators on the continent when it comes to PV training. We also have other countries coming to FDA to take part in GVP inspections or good pharmacovigilance practice inspections when they come for our core program. So these are other opportunities that could be relied on the continent to improve patient safety. Thank you very much. Next slide. So in summary, I'd like to say that Ghana has made good progress over the last 10 years in implementing the GVP requirements. Support from and collaboration with local and international partners has facilitated this progress a great deal. Although there have been improvements in the involvement of African countries in PV over the years, only few countries have a pharma industry actively involved in the PV and with established PV systems. So there's a need for acceleration in the implementation of GVP requirements. And this can be done through collaboration within the continent and through data sharing, joint signal review management, work sharing to review regulatory documents, development, and the use of AI where possible. Then training and benchmarking will also be beneficial in activities like GVP inspection to improve the capacity on the continent. Thank you very much.
Hi, Adela. We've got one question in the Q&A. Can I ask it? So it says, regarding the Ghana legislation on case reporting, there is much difficulty in complying to the short timelines. Is there a possibility to engage with industry and align to ICH guidelines?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Do I answer it now?
You may.
Okay, thank you. So we've had that feedback from, so what we do is that yearly we have the QPPV forum where we meet with all the QPPVs to discuss progress made and implementation of the GVP requirements. So we find out what has worked, what has not worked, and what their concerns are. And we've had this information come up. And what we usually say that, yes, so for serious ADRs or ICSRs, it should be reported within 7 days. And then for non-serious, within 28 days. And then we say that if it's serious, it should be from the time that you have received. So the case whereby the ICSRs are processed, maybe it's from Ghana, but it will be processed outside the country. And then the global agency will have to now send it to Ghana. If they send it at the same time they are sending it to their QPPV, then we beat the timeline. But then if they have to send it to the QPPV, then the QPPV sends it to Ghana, then there's a lag time. We also said that, yes, we are considering how that can be improved. However, in the meantime, a notification of the serious ICSRs before you get the full information is enough for now until you get the complete information. So whilst we are working on reviewing the guidelines as much as possible, we also have given alternatives on how this can be complied with. Thank you.
Thank you, Adela. we still have a couple of minutes, so I would like to ask one more question. And Martha, this question goes to you, where Chahar Ahmed, one of our participants, is asking if at PPB you have like a website or a formal register where people can, the QPPVs can come in and register in advance for the PV training that you are talking about. Anything like this, Martha?
You can hear me? Thank you, Jayesh, and for a participant for that question. So I think moving forward, what we envision is we will have such a platform, probably call for applications for those who are interested in undertaking the QPPV training. What is to note here is that it will be face-to-face or a physical training. So yes, in good time, we will be able to, call for applications and perhaps have a platform where such registration is done. I hope I have addressed your question sufficiently. Thank you.
I hope Chaha's question's been addressed. And yes, Martha, that would be a brilliant way forward so that everyone is committed in advance. And I guess we move now. We've come to the end of the session. We still have one more question. I'm not sure if Flora is there or if Wim wants to answer it.
Well, I was just going to say, JS, thank you. There is a question in the chat if South Africa is looking to implement a training program for QPPVs like in Kenya, if they're going to do something similar in South Africa. And I was going to suggest to maybe keep that question for the panel, because I don't know if we have Flora now, but I believe she'll be back for the panel.
Sure. So then if we are going to the panel, I believe that Pat and Sean have picked up something from the cake advantage that we had seen coming from Kenya. So maybe they have a cake for all of us. So we could move to that session with a 5-minute break. But over to Benita. Benita, anything from your side? Closing remarks?
Nothing on my side. Just thank you for joining session 2. To all our speakers from Uganda, Kenya, and Ghana, we thank you for all the insights that you have shared today. Thank you so much. And we now go to our 5-minute.
Well done, everyone.
Coffee break. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we will allow you to either grab a cup of coffee, tea, maybe a quick snack, or a toilet break, and see you back in 5 minutes.
See you all back. Thank you so much to all the speakers. Bye.
Is there going to be a countdown on the 5 minutes? No idea.
Well, we've got 3 minutes to go. So at 1:15 the hour, we should be back.
I think we've given till 17 past, JH. Very precise. Thank you.
Thanks.
Pat?
Hello, yes, I'm here.
Yeah, as we're gathering, you can see the questions, because we've got a few more questions coming in that I think could be part of the panel discussion.
Yeah, I saw them.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Wim, I don't know, can you hear me? I'm back and I managed to get
Oh,
the other stuff done.
Great, thank you.
No worries.
Good to see you, Raj.
Women multitasking,
Yes, yes, yes. You've done well then. Thank you. Great. We're just coming back from a break. We have 1 more minute, I think.
How did it go, Wim? Did it all go well?
Yeah, it went really well.
Really well. Yeah.
Excellent.
Really nice order as well, I believe.
I think all the hard work from you guys have paid off,
Well, you did the real work, right? All the speakers. Okay, I think we are back. And I can, with this, hand over to Patricia Harding from Eli Lilly and Sean Burke from MSD for our panel discussion.
Great, thanks, Wim. I'm just going to start off by introducing Sean. Sean Burke works for MSD. He's got 20 years experience in PV with 11 years as a director of pharmacovigilance in affiliates at MSD. His current role, he supports pharmacovigilance in Eastern Europe, Middle East and Africa, and he is the chair for the International PV Group Middle East and Africa Working Group in FBA. Sean, are you online? Yes, you are.
Yes, I am. Perfectly. Can you hear me?
You're echoing a bit.
Okay. I'll get through this quickly then. So Pat has worked also for the last 20 years in quality and pharmacovigilance at Lilly. And some of those years I've been fortunate enough to work as a colleague of Pat. Pat is currently a senior advisor in the international region of the Medicines Quality Organization at Lilly and works on global and local PSMFs. Pat has experience participated in many PV inspections and co-chair of the FDA International Pharmacovigilance Group, IPVG, and also participates in Middle East Africa work streams and CIS work streams within the FPA IPVG industry working group.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, so we have quite a few questions. We're going to kick off with one really about the African Medicines Agency. It's been a long time coming. How do our panelists think this is going to impact safety, and what are the current barriers to that working? Would anyone like to start? I can see Raj smiling.
I can let me have a bash at it, Patricia.
Okay.
So the AMA, or the African Medicines Agency, I think is very much in progress in terms of they met, I think, just a couple of weeks ago, that they're setting up the management board, very similar to the EMA management board, and they are, I think, busy looking for a DG now, at least. So it's very much in progress in terms of where it's going. In the context of PV, because I believe that was the question, the AMA, the AMA treaty and the structure of AMA actually foresees a PV technical committee. So it's already envisaged, and I think seen within the context and the structure. So the steering committee members, who are the DGs and CEOs of A3S, have already asked for A3S to continue to move forward. And when AMA is ready to implement their PV technical working committee, it's not a group, it's a committee, then hopefully at that point they're going to try and see whether they can bring AE3S. So in progress, a little bit in flux, like any, like setting up any agency. But like everything else, the design is there.
Fab.
How it transpires, we can't really. So I'm not, I don't know whether others, Helen and others, if you want to comment on it, but that's at least my uptake on it. So there is provision for safety within AMA as a as a committee, safety committee.
Any other comments? No. Sean, I don't know whether you wanted to ask your question that you were going to ask, or do you want me to move on to some of the other questions?
Let's see the questions that we've had through.
Okay, all right.
In mind the same question as I had in mind.
Okay, so one of the questions from the question and answer is for Uganda. Is the regulator going to domesticate the EAC harmonized PV guidelines? Kenya and Rwanda have already done so.
Thank you very much, Patricia, for that question. For Uganda, of course, there is a plan to domesticate, but what prevents like an full adoption is the fact that the legal background to at the moment, especially for Uganda, is a bit different from many of the other countries, but yes, there are plans to adopt as much as possible. And in fact, we have adopted a lot of it, except that without the new amendments being approved, we cannot, our previous system cannot look exactly like, or cannot be the same or adopt fully the ESC requirement guidelines, because we are part of actually the technical working group of developing these guidelines. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So one of the other questions I have is for Uganda, Kenya, and Ghana. There was a reference that most drugs are imported. This means that there's not always an MAH presence in the market. So are PV inspections applying then to the MAHs, distributors and hospitals? And for the hospitals and HCPs that import medicines, do they fall under the inspection requirement? Not sure who wants to take that one.
So I could go first.
Okay.
So you're asking about inspections for all levels. So here you've mentioned health facilities and MAH and local technical representatives. So what we do in Kenya, generally, even our guidances, and I had mentioned the pharmacovigilance and PMS rules, which is, the latest enacted regulation. We say that we shall, the QPPVs, whether it is LTRs or the MAHs, they are supposed to appoint, qualified persons for pharmacovigilance, and they're supposed to have PV systems established so that now we conduct PV inspections for them. For the hospitals, what we do is we usually carry out pharmacovigilance, more like assessment, where we use, there's a tool, I think we, sort of tweaked it from the WHO iPad. And we did it, I think, for the EAC region and the IGAD, where we also require the health facilities to have PV systems in place. So those tools, couple of indicators that actually speak to PV systems at the health facility levels, the public health programs, that is the HIV, malaria programs, because even with them, they need to have established PV systems so that, sometimes we have reports going to them, and how do they handle, including feedback to those reporters. So that is the way we've gone about it in Kenya. Thank you.
Okay. Do any of the other regulators, would they like to talk to that?
Okay, so thank you. So I'd like to share the Ghana experience. In Ghana, inspections, as I said earlier on, in our guidelines, PV is mandatory only for the pharmaceutical company.
Right.
Healthcare professionals and patients, it's voluntary. So when we use the term inspections, it's only for the marketing authorization holder. Now, QPPV is a responsibility of the marketing authorization holder. And in Ghana, every marketing authorization holder, it's either you are there in Ghana or you have a local representative, which is a legal entity representing you. The PV system inspections are done at either the offices of the MAH or their legal representative, that's a local representative. So we do it in country in the facility where the PV system is established, where the local or the qualified person for pharmacovigilance is located. In the case where there's a third party that performs some functions for the MAH, for example, if they do signal management for them, if they do literature review for them, we review their contract. If it's needed in the case where their data is stored somewhere, we might have to go and inspect that place. But then inspection is done for the MAH. Inspections or assessment in hospitals are surveillance activities where they usually go and check if the products are being stored properly. So do not do PV inspections in hospitals.
Okay.
The other thing we have for PV to help or improve PV in hospitals or the healthcare setting is what we do as a peer review. So it's a PV assessment tool with indicators that have been included in the hospital peer review mechanism. So you do not need FDA representatives to go into that facility to inspect their PV system, because we don't want them to feel that, when people hear inspection, there's all these ideas about inspection, somebody coming to check what you are doing. So we have the indicators, whether you have an institutional contact person, whether you have the reporting tools in the facility, how many reports that you have, whether you have a drugs and therapeutic committee and its PV issues on the agenda of the drugs and therapeutic committee is there. So the healthcare facilities themselves have adopted this indicators and put in their peer review indicator and they use it. So our regional officers will then go and see, okay, in this peer review, what was the PV outcome? But the FDA officers do not do inspections in hospitals. We only do the good pharmacovigilance practice inspections for the marketing authorization holders or their local representatives in country.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, shall I move on to another question then? So this is about QPPVs. We're currently seeing local requirements for QPPVs to reside in a country, which can be difficult for some pharma companies who only have presence in some countries. Would this work on a regional basis? And again, this is really for the regulators on the line. So would you consider a regional QPPV?
Okay, if I may come in again.
Okay.
Thank you. In Ghana, it is a requirement that a qualified person for pharmacovigilance is resident in country. This is because we are looking at the safety monitoring system in the country. You need to be able to have a system for collecting the ICSRs from any part of the country that your product could be, or your product has been distributed to. When we found it not very efficient, if we have a QPPV living outside the country, then if there's a safety issue that needs urgent attention, you might not have the right person going there or being aware for immediate response. So that is why it's required. We are even moving to the requirement whereby the backup person must also be resident in country.
Wow. Okay.
Not fully implemented that yet, because the QPPV must be available the whole year round, every time of the day. So if the person is not available, the backup should also be available. Previously, we were okay with regional backup arrangements, but now we are moving to the backup also being in country, so that if the person is not there, has maybe taken a day off, the backup is in place. And if that is the day that a safety issue comes up, the backup is readily available to take action. So for now, we do not accept regional QPPVs. And because the system is also developing, you must have the people knowing our requirements, know how the data is going to be collected and how the data is going to be processed, how it comes into the system. So going at the early stages, it could be that later on when there's harmonization, there might be some concentration. But now at the initial stages, we must build a strong system. And so there's requirement or there's need for building capacity and making sure that we have the QP who can do the work. And then if they're experienced and there could be other things that they add on, we can do that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anybody else would like to talk to that?
We have Helen's hand up, Pat.
Oh, Helen. Hi, Helen.
Yes, hi. I support what Andela is talking about, because mainly we find that there is very limited capacity in country. So a regional person would come in, but maybe to support the country teams to develop their capacity to do this, because without this, then we shall not have a PV system for, for Africa. We shall take a very long time. So maybe the other question that I also wanted to address was the issue of fees. The issue of fees is highly, inspections, who meet the cost of inspections or of having this product on the market. This is part of this cost, but having a QPPV. But the issue is that the fees have to be met by, if they are not met by say like the manufacturers for having their product on the market, then they will have to be met by the patient themselves, because or the regulatory authority, because at this point when you look at the fees, the fee structure, the burden on the market for having this product followed up and all these activities done to ensure the effective monitoring of products on the market. I think that many countries have not thought about this, and I think that a discussion should be there with the industry to ensure that these fees are adequately catered for, because now when it comes to in developing countries, again, you look at the hospital. So the product is in the hospital, the product is on the market. How do you facilitate that work in the health facilities? Martha has talked, Adela has talked about the MTCs. Yes, we do all this, but at the end of the day, when issues come up again, the manufacturer needs to have an upper hand, I think, in this, and this system is not yet fully in place. And I think that at the moment, the middle ground would be to have at least a local presence versus a regional presence. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so another question that actually came from within.
Sorry to intervene.
Sorry.
I think Flora, also you have your hand up.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine, Pat. But I just want to echo my colleagues' sentiments to say pharmacovigilance as a science is quite young in the African region. So there's still a need to make sure that it's strengthened, and we can only strengthen it at a country level before we can actually move it to a regional level. So it's quite important that we build the culture of reporting within and ensure that at a country level, we are able to manage before we can actually consider looking at a regional level. So that's just my few sentiments. Thanks.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so we have one from the FPA International PV Group. So we work hard to bring harmonization to the requirements in the African region. Could further collaboration between us and the African health authorities and industry associations help facilitate this? So could we work in more collaboration with you guys, basically?
Okay, I will start from South Africa's point of view. So in South Africa, we have a working group or working groups with the industry. where we meet on a quarterly basis, and then from both angles, then we will highlight the challenges that maybe we come across in our day-to-day proceedings with regards to the pharmacovigilance and any other regulatory work. So we also have the sub-working groups for each function. For instance, we have the PV working group. It's also on a quarterly basis that we meet and address any pharmacovigilance activities. So this working groups has actually assisted in terms of improving the systems, because from a regulator's point of view, when I write guidelines, sometimes maybe I don't take into consideration the practicality of implementation of those particular guidelines. So when it comes to the industry side, so they will then narrate the challenges that they come across. For instance, the issue that we just spoke to regarding the QPPV. So one of our requirements as well is to say that there's a need for the backup QPPV to be based in the country. But based on the interactions that we've been having with industry, we are reconsidering that the backup maybe to be based elsewhere, not necessarily in the country, in view of the fact of the challenges that they have highlighted. So these collaborations, in summary, they are quite important and they actually improve the systems. However, it's quite important to caution not to compromise, rather, the safety of the patient. So the patient first, and then all others can follow. Thanks.
Okay. And Martha, I see your hands up.
Yes, more collaborations is a good thing, especially the pharma industry. I think in country, we closely work with the Kenya Association of Pharmaceutical Industry. We have scheduled meetings ever so often. Even with the recent patient, safety day, we actually had a walk together with the Ministry of Health and CAPI represented. You've heard about the testament about, the QPPV curriculum training and, just getting input from their, perspective. So yes, I think there's still room for more collaboration in terms of, capacity building, information sharing, especially when we have, signal detection. How do we strengthen those signals? Most of, sometimes we do require information from the marketing authorization holders to help us do that evidence-based decision making. CAPI, I think, has a subcommittee for PV, and we engage a lot. So I am all for it. Thank you.
It's nice to work in partnership, definitely. Adela, I can see your hand up. Oh, you're on mute, Adela.
Yes, sorry, thank you. So, yes, so in Ghana, I mentioned earlier on that every year we have a forum where we meet our qualified persons for pharmacovigilance. So at that forum, what we do is that we show them the progress so far. We show them the inspections that we have done. We show them what the key findings are, what the weaknesses are, so they can know that where they can improve on, and we discuss. We also show them, for example, the reporting pattern, the quality of reports that they receive. Then there's a section where the QP will also present to us what their challenges are and what their recommendations are. So one of the colleagues earlier on mentioned about the timelines for the ICSR submission. So that's one of the things that came up in last year's discussion that we are looking at. But in the interim, we've given alternatives to how we can go about it whilst we change the guidelines, because the guidelines also need to be reviewed and see in the best of patient interest, how do we go about reviewing the guidelines? So we don't just review it like that. So the QP forum is there. Even during our QP training, we have a QPPV coming in to share their experiences with the other people so they know practically what is happening. We also have still has an open door system whereby the AREPI, that's the ethical companies, and the PMAC, the Pharmaceutical Manufacturers Association of Ghana, periodically come to meet with her to discuss key things that maybe they think that we are delayed in implementing or to speak to her directly about. So she receives them and then takes their feedback. So we are constantly discussing with industry how best to improve it. If they have issues, for example, one of the comments they said was that they are QP, they want to work, sometimes they do not get the support from their management because they do not appreciate it. So then what we did was we organized a forum for the managers only, for them to come and hear what the requirements are, what they need to support the QPV to do their work. So even though they are complying, there's been a QPPV, it's not just having the QP, it's having the resources, the systems in place. So when we had the meeting with the managers of the industry, there was really an appreciation of what the QP needed to do, and those improvement in the collaboration or the support that they gave to their QPVs. And following that, I even had some of the managers attend the QPV training because they realized that it's a very good thing that they needed to do. So we work with the industry and then even with our guidelines when we develop them, we let them have a say because that one is even part of our ISO requirements for them to get feedback. So these are ways that in Ghana, we collaborate with industry to push the agenda for, because Ghana actually started it, and we must find early what the challenges are and how best we can improve on it so that other countries who are also following can learn from what we are doing, and as we always share our experiences, improve the safety of patients on the continent. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Raj, I see your hand is up.
Thank you. Look, safeguarding public health doesn't just belong to the regulators, it also belongs to the marketing authorization holder. It's a joint accountability.
Yeah.
So it's a no-brainer that partnership is a necessity.
Absolutely.
Right. So for me, it's very inherent in the way we need to think of public safety. Each player, each entity has a role to play. You know, and then coming together is what, and particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, in the continent of Africa, things are moving, they're changing. As you saw from my AU3S presentation, you heard from the colleagues from the different regulatory agencies, things are moving. And for industry, you need to know what is changing. And I think for regulators, you need to make sure that change is very well publicly communicated. Because being unaware may not be good enough if we drop the ball in safety. So I think for me, it's totally inherent in the discussion. You almost have to start with a premise that they have to work together. The question is more around how.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
It's safeguarding conflicts of interest, you know, all of that. It's around the how. I think that for IFPMA, that would be my advice. The focus needs to be on how do you work together. If we work together or not, it's not a question. For me, it's you know, for patients, for the sake of patients, you have to work together. In AU3S, what I didn't have time to talk about a little bit is when we kicked this off about 3 years ago, a bit longer, I brought 4 heads of safety together. It was just a network that I had access to. So it's the head of safety in Janssen, J&J, Pfizer, AbbVie, GSK, and IFPMA too. It was Janice Bernard who was the member. And we shared information going forward. Today, that membership has increased just through the AU3S, you know, exposure, that we have Corinne from Sanofi and Magnus from AstraZeneca have requested to join. And we also may have interest from BMS. But essentially the point I'm making is this group is growing. And in the past, I used to bring WHO to the table with this group, and also outer in there. As we're moving forward now for the next aspect, the thinking is we're going to convene at the beginning of next year. We do once a year face-to-face meetings with the heads of safety. Is also to start talking to see, I'll be talking to the CEOs, the steering committee, to see, do they want to be part of sharing the information from the countries? So, you know, Helen and Adela, you know, are you able to bring and share what is going on and create that platform for exchange of information? Clearly product agnostic, because we cannot discuss products on those environments for all the obvious reasons. But a platform for sharing information is something. So we are planning to move towards that direction with the heads of safeties from all of these companies. They're already existing. We currently have got 6. And then we're going to add a couple more to it at the request of the companies. This is not, we're not going out asking for membership. So quite a nice natural evolution, I think, occurring there under the 3S piece as well, that we can, you know, I'm happy to talk to FPLV if we have different opportunities there to do that pattern. Over.
Brilliant. Thank you. A quick one for Adela. Does Ghana allow one QPPV to represent 2 MAHs?
Hi. Okay, so I think I read that question in the chat.
Yeah,
So
it is.
in our requirements, in our guidelines, one QPPV represents one marketing authorization holder. And that's because we want them to be committed to the work that they are doing, and then have all the resources and the focus. It's a new thing that we are doing, and so we need dedication, and not whereby they are looking at so many marketing authorization holders at the same time. However, in Ghana, we also have a local representative that could represent more than one marketing authorization holder. And marketing authorization holders have raised concerns about how they have challenges in getting a QPB for every marketing authorization holder. So on Friday, for example, we met with a company that has 14 MAH that it is representing. That means they must have 40 marketing authorization holders. So the pharmaceutical companies came together, REPI and the PMAC, and then they spoke to the CEO and they said that, okay, we want to comply, but then it's challenging having to train 14 QPPVs and letting them be dedicated to the activity. Is there a way that we could mix them so that we could find a workable solution? So what has been done is that on a case-by-case issue, the key principle is one MAH, one QPPV. But if you have a local representative that has 14 MAHs, yes, the responsibility is for the marketing authorization holder, but managing them might also be a challenge. We request that each of these marketing authorization holders have their own independent PV systems in country. However, based on a risk profiling process, we can allow one QPPV to represent more than one. We usually have it for 1 to 2 MAHs. So if you have an MAH that has a high risk product, maybe vaccines, maybe for vulnerable people, products with additional monitoring requirements or additional expansion measures, and they have another company that is mainly generic or low risk products, then we have a way, okay, if this MAH can have a QPPV presenting these two. But that is on condition that we'll come and do a GVP inspection and find out how the QPPV is managing the two companies. And if it is satisfactory following the requirement, then it's like a yearly thing. We'll come again to find it's working, then fine. If we realize that you are not able to combine the responsibility for the two companies, then we might have to take alternative actions to make sure that patient safety is not compromised. So yes, the principle is one QPPV, one MAH. However, in some cases, we make exceptions based on risk assessment. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. So we'll move on to another one. Felix, I don't know whether you've seen this one in the chat. It's a question to you. What are your thoughts on the MAH using regulatory affairs staff of an LTR as QPPV? As Helen mentioned, from Uganda's pilot PV inspection experience, there was a high workload when regulatory affairs also doubled as QPPV.
Yeah, thanks, Patricia, and yeah, thanks to the participant to ask the question. Actually, I agree with the health authority. PV is a broad area that requires independent resourcing, and as an LTR or an MAH, there should be efforts to have the PV function resourced as much as possible. But in our setup, I believe we have to start from a particular point, and we are actually at nascent stages, I believe. And as we grow and advance in our PV systems, we should be able to have all our MAHs invest in PV resourcing and have independent PV functions. And that is where we are headed. And that is why I think we are having all these initiatives and sensitization and yeah, a drive towards compliance. So I believe we'll get there at some point, and that is the intention. And even from the MAH side, I believe that is what we are working towards.
Okay, thank you. There's a few more questions from me, apparently, but not from me. How do the regulatory agencies ensure there are no ambiguities in their guidelines so MAHs can correctly interpret and implement appropriately? So again, I think that's for the regulators. I'm assuming you issue draft guidelines and ask for comments. That's what we normally see.
So I'll just start with that, Pat. It's exactly what we do. So once we have a draft, we publish it on our website. And then we also share with the platform that I referred to earlier in terms of collaboration with the MAHs so that they can provide comment, and we give them at least about 3 months, a minimum of 3 months, to ensure that they've got enough time to review the guideline and provide their feedback. It's not all the time where the suggested part maybe we will take. However, in most cases, we do consider the input that is coming from the industry. So in that way, we try to take out any ambiguity that may be unintended in the guideline. So with the systems guideline, for instance, once we do that, we do have the workshop as well to discuss further on the requirements that are set in the guideline, the final draft, and then we can also go back and amend if there's a need. So with the systems guideline, because it was a new guideline, then what we did, then we did the pilot inspection to see the applicability of this guideline in practice. And then based on that, we also came back and then reviewed the guideline and make amendments. So we do try by all means to take out the ambiguity so that it becomes easier for the MHS to implement the requirements. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you. There is a couple of more questions, so we're just going to move on quickly. Sean, do you want to take Janesh's question?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So again, it's in the Q&As. Just reading this. So from Jayesh, have the GVP inspections that the agencies have been doing impacted the implementation of the GVP requirements in Ghana? That's to Ghana and to Helen as well. So basically, I think in summary, the outcomes of the inspections and the impact on implementation of more harmonized ICH GVP requirements.
Hello, please. Was the question to Ghana? There's a bit of an echo in Berg's voice.
Yeah.
So I think it was to Ghana. I couldn't hear it clearly.
Shall I repeat it? So the question is from Janesh. Have the GVP inspections that you've conducted implemented the implementation of GVP requirements in Ghana and Uganda? So are you now looking at your requirements and thinking there needs to be a bit more harmonization, I guess? Janesh, do you want to clarify your question?
Yeah, so basically where I'm coming from, Adela and Helen, is you have experience in inspections. You've been doing them in your respective countries. From the findings of these inspections, are you now learning something and going back to your guideline to make it again fit for purpose? Uganda and Ghana.
Okay. Okay, it seems we both waited for each other to speak, but I will go first. Yes, of course, that's why we did the pilot. It's really a learning curve for us. And of course, I will just say it here that learning from what for instance, what Kenya has recently developed, the QPPV, the guidelines for selection of a QPPV. I think that's one area that we can immediately take on, because much as we had the general guidelines for GVP inspection, we did not have a specific one for appointing the QPPV, and we found a hard time implementing it. So we realized that also for that one, we shall need a specific guideline, and that has been very helpful. Thank you.
Adela, can you quickly answer this? I think we've run out of time, so you're on mute again. Adela, you're on mute.
sorry, the things that we've learned from the inspection that have informed a review of the guidelines. One of them being the need for redesignation of our QPPs. Realize that when you have the QPPV and you do not request for some requirements to meet a redesignation, then they go and they do not continue learning new things that are coming up, because PV is a fast-moving science. And so we have put in our guidelines that every 3 years you need to come for redesignation, and you need to present evidence of having undertaken a training that's related to your function as a QPPV. And so we actually encourage all our people to join this session so that they could learn from other countries and see how best that can go towards their requirements. But one of the challenges is what courses they need to take. And sometimes their managers are not prepared to pay for courses that are outside. And so we don't want to increase the burden, the cost burden, but find ways that they can actually get the redesignation done. And then also the CAPA feedback. When we have the inspections, we require that they bring the CAPA plan within 21 working days. Realize that sometimes you go for inspection and then they say, oh, they've completed, but then they've not given feedback. So we've actually had to review the guidelines to request that you need to provide evidence of completion of the CAPA within 30 days after completion. That's the last date in your CAPA, so that they can know that this is required and that they can implement it. And thirdly, a change that we've had to do based on the training or the inspection is the backup, the need for the backup to be resident in Ghana, and the need for the backup to have formal training as QPP. So these are the key 3 things that I can say that have evolved from the implementation of the GP requirements and the PV inspections so far. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you everyone for all your fantastic questions. There are a few left, but we'll send them to our panelists after the meeting for them to answer for you. Thank you, panelists. You've been absolutely fantastic. And now I'm going to hand over to Wim.
Thank you, Pat and Sean and everyone on the panel. And this actually brings us to the conclusion of today's conference with a focus on pharmacovigilance as part of the IFPMA regulatory conference. And I would like to close out today with a few takeaways for all of you. So for me, the red line throughout all of the presentation and discussions was around collaboration, progress, and listening to each other. So we had a very clear example of the collaboration between countries based on the African Union Smart Safety Surveillance and the Fit for Purpose program that is global, but that works with the country specificities and that aims to do away with silos to improve safety, adverse event reporting and sharing of information. So it's about transparency. It brings safety to the forefront in all of the regions in Africa through the sharing across countries. We then saw what that meant for a particular country, and through examples of how the safety system actually was empowered and growing and was able to implement improvements related to safety data. The importance of awareness, pharmacovigilance and safety awareness, training, tools, translation, and collaboration helped strengthen the culture of safety in that particular country. Managing integration and harmonization, as well as data privacy, were highlighted as some of the challenges that have to be managed. And I think all of us in industry, regulators, academia, and other organizations are very familiar with those challenges. But collaboration and harmonization are key for the improved resilience of pharmacovigilance systems in the countries. The sharing of learnings is one way to change and to make sure that we consider feedback will help us improve systems. We also had some very clear examples and practical examples how country pharmacovigilance systems are actually growing in strength and resilience. We heard about the inspection plans and programs, the QPPV training, as well as the requirements in the different countries. And that there is this need for the strengthening of the legal basis around pharmacovigilance to make this work. These presentations really all demonstrate the growth and strengthening of pharmacovigilance in the African continent and the individual countries. Some countries have had a longer history of pharmacovigilance systems than others, but what is clearly demonstrated is the growth of pharmacovigilance and safety systems across that region. The collaborative efforts, and we heard specific examples in the last presentation from Adela Ashi, but all of the presentations refer to examples, as well as the words from Flora from South Africa that I would like to echo, the importance of the strengthening of pharmacovigilance in a country will then help us improve safety across the region. So these collaborative efforts and the awareness of safety for medicines is what we need to look forward to as we move forward. The systems will be strengthened. And again, I would like to highlight the keywords of collaboration and progress as we move forward. Watch this space. A big thank you to all of our excellent speakers, their very informative presentations, the moderators that have made it possible that we stick to time, and IFPMA for the collaboration with the FPR IPVG. Thank you all and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.